focus on the good, talk about good things.
Abraham's fortune.
Kind of drawing back to psychology rather than all of academics.
It's
um,
hard. Psychology, and I mean all sciences, but I feel like psychology in particular is it's so hard to not talk about biology or to not talk about these other sides, sociology, when you're
mhm.
talking about psychology.
There's so much overlap. I mean, it's the study of human people, so we do everything, right? So it's like, yeah, there's a lot of overlap there.
Well, one thing I always thought was kind of interesting about psychology and the Bible is that the Bible totally like it doesn't say anything is like a psychological principle, but it'll say like these things are good for your faith and like it's like basic psychological reinforcement theories and stuff like that. Like talk about your faith and it'll become stronger. And like yeah, that's true.
Mm.
And like it has all these psychological truths in it that are just super interesting. And like even
Oh,
some
for
kind of
sure.
weird things like we have a center in our brain for snake recognition, which you could totally make an evolutionary case for. But it also is pretty interesting that like main bad guy in the Bible is a snake. Well, at least appears as a snake in one
Mhm.
part, and
Yeah.
there's just some interesting psychological themes almost, but
Yeah.
truth as well. Like
And sorry, go ahead. I didn't.
I don't know, take over.
Um, with the snake thing as well, then it comes down to like, because Genesis can also be interpreted, that passage anyways can be interpreted as poetry. So it's did which came first, the snake or the um, I guess
Yeah.
fear of snakes. So is it like a literal passage where it was a snake, or is it more we put Satan into that representation because there is such that strong it highlights through like poetry form the severity of the danger of Satan. And it's like which is, and I'm not taking a side for either position, but there are different interpretations as to how that Genesis passage should be viewed. So I think that there's something there for sure, but it's which way are we approaching it? One other thing that I wanted to jump to, unless you had a comment on that first, um, was you were saying like the passages that are like talk about your faith strengthens. There's also like that passage that talks about like talk about good things, and it's kind of like that positivity mindset, and that's something that we use a lot in coaching is that forward moving, think of the good and don't focus on the bad, because if you focus on the bad it becomes like stronger and bigger, and those yeah, that principle of like focus on the good, talk about good things, don't talk about like the negative, like avoid like trauma bonding, and be focused on the good that's happening in our lives. So
And at least what you can do, and like there's even that I've been hearing it all over the place. Like say three things that you're happy about today at the end of each day, or something like
mhm,
that. Those sort of things.
gratitude
Those
practices.
could be almost biblical for real.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that, especially like the book of Proverbs too has a lot of little small snippets in it that is just like, oh, this is like very valuable.
Yeah, I
And
heard this in Psych 204.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting how true it is to human behavior.
Mhm.
I don't really, yeah, it's an interesting thing to reconcile.
See, my view, and like I know a lot of people have different views on the Bible, but um, I'm kind of like God created us. He knows us the best, so of course He's gonna like shove those things in there. Um, but yeah, I think they're there for a reason, and
I just have to think about like somebody who isn't faith based though. Like I don't know, my supervisor, for example, trying to read this, and you get to some stories, and why is that there? Like, why did they have this so well worded? And this is true. I read this in a study last week, and I don't know. I just try to think
yeah,
about that perspective
and
sometimes. Like, is it just like refinement over very many years until they got down to the truth? But we know humans are really bad at that. That we're really good at inferring causality where it's not. So how come?
mhm.
Sorry, it's interesting to
No,
think.
it is, and I think like, and again, obviously, I would say that it's evidence for
Yeah, no,
God, right?
I
But
absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I
but
mean,
I sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, like whenever you read something like that, like I know when I was coming to my faith a couple of years ago now, that was something that like stuck in my head for forever. Was like, why are all of these truths in here? And I'm sure it's true outside of psychology as well. But the ones I knew were in psychology because I just did an undergrad in it.
Yeah.
And so, like, trying to reconcile why those were there and so consistent, and that was something that totally I could never do without God. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And and again, I would say that it's absolutely like a testament to who God is and the fact that he wanted to communicate with us. But from outsiders' perspective, because you were saying like how would somebody view that who's not a Christian, the consensus that I have heard, well, different things, different views, but one of them is that like, well, society, we have this um, mindset in society that we're progressing, but that idea that maybe we're not, and they actually were as far along as we are, and they just were writing these stories to show these things that they were picking up on. Um,
What do you mean as far along as we are?
well, after the Enlightenment, things started to kind of like, we have this view that society is always progressing and getting better and improving and getting more knowledge and um, all those kinds of views. And it's kind of debated as to whether or not that's true, how true it is.
Well, we definitely know more things. We know more things today than we did yesterday. Whether
Yeah.
or not it's some professor just in one school who knows the extra thing, I don't know how well we disseminating it. I don't know, but as a population, we definitely know more things.
Yeah, but
We
it's
we,
like,
we know more about the Bible today than we did 300 years ago, right? Like,
mhm.
we definitely know more.
But I
Are
think it's,
we different, or are we more moral, or something like that? I think is maybe a different question.
mhm,
But
yeah. But being that so much of what's in the Bible is like moral based, you could say they recognized these things even though they didn't have the psychology to go with it yet, right? But again, this is kind of playing devil's advocate because I'm with you where I was like, I see it and I'm like, wow, like God knows what he's talking about. But I'm just saying like things that I've heard from people who aren't of the faith and that.
so I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the position. They
So they
say,
back then they had all the, like, we'll call it like knowledge of psychology, but they didn't, it wasn't knowledge of psychology. It was just like they recognized the human behavior patterns happening around them and unfolding, and wrote down stories that reflected those patterns.
well, I think it's fair to say that there's innate human behavior, right? Like there are
Mm-hmm.
things that humans are naturally inclined to do anyways. Not that all humans will do them or that all humans will do them in all environments, but people are inclined to care about those close to them, for example. On average, people like their mom. Whether or not you love her or it's to a different degree, but if you saw her in trouble, you might help. That might be something that we could predict on average would happen. Um, and I think the argument that I usually hear is that these morals are things that you can naturally absorb in the environment or they're innate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the faith argument against them is that okay, well, why are they innate to you, and who put them there, and uh, I think that makes them a little bit not innate.
Yeah.
But why do you have them? You know, why do you want to go help mom? Is it just evolutionary? Why do we do some things that don't appear to be evolutionary, or at least we can't explain?
Mm-hmm.
Though that is a small subset.
Or like, why are most people willing to risk a life for a baby that's not even theirs, or like that they don't even know? But if they see a baby in trouble, usually you're willing to put your life on the line for that baby, even though, especially like evolutionary, like, yeah, for a species, you're protecting the herd,
The
but
argument, right, is that we evolved as a species, and that species, it was that social evolution or
but
community evolution.
there's also like the idea with evolution, you want your genes to be like the ones that get passed on, right? So it's actually beneficial in some ways for that baby to die. Not that I'm advocating for letting babies die, but like
It's a
some,
complex formula, I think, because you have to have, if you are a community who is entirely that way, then you're going to fail to a community that's more like ours. And then in that case, that community who is working together is actually the one who overall has their genes passed on, and
Mm,
the community that's cutthroat for just their own genes won't, even though they were more cutthroat for their own genes.
that's true.
I
But
mean, and
it's
this like complex interactions of everything makes it really hard to say anything causally. I don't know if it's even possible. So
for sure.